Right now, somewhere, you are bored. Maybe you're waiting for a kettle to boil. Maybe you're standing in a line that isn't moving. Your hand twitches toward your phone before you've even decided to move it. You unlock it. You don't know why. You just couldn't sit there with nothing. You probably think boredom is a flaw, a glitch in your attention. Something to be cured, scrolled away, snacked away, numbed away. But the real answer is far stranger. Boredom isn't a malfunction. It's a signal. It might be one of the most important feelings you have, and you've spent your entire life trying to kill it the moment it appears. Think about the last time you felt truly bored, not mildly distracted, bored, stuck in a waiting room with a dead phone, sitting through a meeting that wouldn't end, lying in bed at 2 a.m. with nothing to do and nowhere to be. What did you feel? Restlessness, a kind of itch behind your eyes, maybe even a low hum of dread, like something was wrong and you needed to fix it immediately. That feeling has a name. Psychologist Sandy Mann, who has spent over a decade studying boredom at the University of Central Lancashire, defines it simply: an unpleasant state that arises when you can't find something to occupy your attention. Your brain isn't broken when it does this. Your brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do. Here's the part that should stop you. In 2014, psychologist Timothy Wilson and his team at the University of Virginia ran an experiment that sounds almost absurd. They left people alone in a room with nothing to do for 15 minutes. No phone, no book, just a chair and their own thoughts. Many participants hated it so much that when given the option, they chose to give themselves a mild electric shock rather than sit in silence with their own minds. A shock over stillness. Why would a feeling so uncomfortable that people would rather hurt themselves than sit with it still be wired into you? Why hasn't evolution simply removed it? Because boredom isn't punishment, it's propulsion. Picture your ancestors 40,000 years ago, a small band of humans on the savannah, food secured for the moment, no immediate threat in sight. In that lull, something had to push them to keep moving, keep exploring, keep noticing. If they stayed perfectly content doing nothing, they would never have wandered toward the next valley, the next water source, the next opportunity. Boredom was the nudge, the internal voice that said, "This isn't enough, there's something more useful you could be doing right now." It wasn't comfortable, it wasn't supposed to be. Discomfort is what moves a creature forward. This is the theory put forward by researcher Erin Westgate, who studies the psychology of boredom at the University of Florida. Her meaning and attention components model suggests boredom strikes hardest when two things happen at once. Your attention has nothing to latch onto, and the moment feels meaningless. Your brain isn't built to tolerate empty, meaningless time. It's built to chase a way out of it, and that chasing is exactly what built civilization. Think about it. Curiosity, invention, exploration, art. All of it requires a starting itch, a dissatisfaction with the current moment. If your ancestors had been able to sit in a cave feeling perfectly fine doing nothing forever, there would have been no reason to invent the spear, the fire pit, the wheel, the alphabet. Boredom is the ancient engine behind almost everything you call progress. Here's where it gets stranger. Boredom doesn't just push you to act, it pushes you specifically toward novelty. Studies on the brain's dopamine system show that new, unpredictable stimuli activate reward circuitry far more strongly than familiar, predictable ones. Your brain isn't rewarding you for comfort, it's rewarding you for change, which means the bored brain isn't lazy, it's starving. Starving for new information, new input, new direction. And that hunger is precisely what every notification, every video platform, every infinite scroll feed has learned to exploit. Here's the modern mirror, and it's not a flattering one. You feel that first flicker of boredom, the itch behind the eyes, and before it can build into anything useful, anything that might push you to think, to wonder, to create, you reach for your phone. You feed the hunger instantly with something engineered to be more stimulating than your own unstructured thoughts could ever be. Tech companies didn't invent your boredom, they simply learned to intercept it before it could do its job. Sandy Mann's later research found something that should genuinely surprise you. In her studies, participants who were deliberately bored before a creative task performed better on measures of creative thinking than those who weren't bored at all. Boredom, before it gets numbed, appears to loosen the mind. It lets it wander into places focused attention never goes. This is why some of your best ideas arrive in the shower, on a long walk, during a dull commute. Not because those moments are special, because they're empty. And emptiness, when you don't immediately fill it, is where your mind starts generating instead of just consuming. So what happens when boredom never gets the chance to finish its job? Some researchers now suspect that chronic, instant boredom relief, the kind made possible by a phone in every pocket, might be quietly weakening your tolerance for the very discomfort that used to produce your best thinking. If every itch gets scratched within 4 seconds, you never learn to sit with the itch long enough for it to turn into something. You don't just lose boredom, you lose what boredom was for. There's an experiment worth picturing here. Imagine two versions of yourself, one who, the next time boredom strikes, reaches immediately for a screen, and one who sits with it, lets the discomfort build for just a few minutes longer, lets the mind start wandering towards something it hasn't thought about in weeks. Which one is more likely to have an idea that actually matters? You already know the answer. You've probably felt it. That strange moment mid-shower, mid-walk, mid-stare out the window, when a thought arrives that you didn't go looking for. That thought was boredom finishing the job your ancestors relied on for survival. There's a darker side to this story, though, and it's worth understanding before you romanticize boredom too much. Not all boredom leads somewhere useful. Researchers studying the topic have identified different flavors of it. Some boredom is calming, almost meditative, the kind you feel staring out a train window. Other boredom is agitated, restless, closer to anxiety than reflection. It's this second kind, the jittery kind, that tends to send people straight for their phones, or worse, toward impulsive decisions they wouldn't otherwise make. Studies tracking behavior in casinos, for instance, have found that boredom-prone individuals are more likely to gamble not for the money but for the stimulation. The same hunger that once pushed your ancestors toward a new water source now pushes some people toward a slot machine. The mechanism hasn't changed in 40,000 years, only the available outlets have. This is part of why understanding boredom matters so much right now. You live in the first era of human history where every outlet for that hunger is instantly available, infinitely varied, and engineered by people who study your attention for a living. Your ancestors' boredom had nowhere to go except outward, into the world, into exploration, into invention. Your boredom has somewhere far easier to go, inward, into a feed, into a loop that never quite satisfies and never quite ends. Think about how strange that actually is. The feeling that once built spears and fire pits and language itself now mostly gets resolved by a thumb moving half an inch on a piece of glass. Not because the feeling changed, because the easiest available response to it changed. There's a generation of researchers now asking an uncomfortable question. If boredom is supposed to push you toward something new, something effortful, something that takes real cognitive work to produce, what happens when the path of least resistance is always sitting right there in your pocket? Does the muscle that used to handle longer stretches of unstructured time start to atrophy? Some early evidence suggests yes. People who report constantly relieving boredom with their phones also report, on average, lower scores on measures of sustained attention and creative problem solving. Correlation isn't causation, and researchers are careful to say that, but the pattern is consistent enough to take seriously. It's worth pausing on children here too. A generation ago, a bored child on a long car ride had nothing but a window and their own imagination. They built entire worlds out of nothing, counted cars, invented games, talked to no one in particular. That unstructured stretch of nothing was, by every account researchers can measure, fertile ground for imagination to develop. Now that same car ride often comes with a screen mounted to the headrest. The boredom never gets the chance to start, let alone finish. Some child psychologists worry cautiously that an entire generation is growing up without ever experiencing the kind of sustained, unrelieved boredom that used to be a normal, even formative, part of childhood. This isn't a call to throw away every screen and suffer for the sake of suffering. Boredom for its own sake isn't the goal. The goal is recognizing what the feeling is actually for, so you stop treating it like an enemy to be defeated in under 5 seconds. None of this means boredom feels good. It was never supposed to feel good. Discomfort is the mechanism, not the flaw. The unpleasantness is the push. What it means is that the urge to instantly escape it might be costing you more than you realize. Not because boredom is pleasant, but because it's productive, in a way nothing engineered to feel good ever quite manages to be. There's one more piece of this worth knowing because it changes how you might treat the next boring moment you encounter. Researchers who study creativity have noticed something counterintuitive about where good ideas actually come from. They rarely arrive during intense focus. They arrive during what scientists call the default mode network's activity, a state your brain enters specifically when you're not concentrating on anything in particular. Daydreaming, in other words, mind wandering, the exact mental state boredom tends to produce right before you reach for a distraction to shut it down. Neuroscientist Marcus Reichel, who helped identify this default mode network at Washington University, found that this network lights up most strongly during idle moments, not productive ones. It's almost as if your brain saved its most generative processing for the times you thought you were doing nothing at all, which means the boredom you've spent your whole life trying to eliminate might be the doorway to the exact mental state your best ideas need in order to form. Every time you fill that doorway with a notification before it opens all the way, you might be closing it on a thought you'll never get to have. So here's the question worth sitting with. The next time that itch shows up behind your eyes, what if, instead of reaching for the nearest screen, you let it sit there a little longer? What if you let your mind do what it was built to do during empty moments? Search, wander, generate, instead of consuming something built by someone else to fill the silence for you. Right now, somewhere, you are bored. And for the first time, maybe you'll let it finish what it started.